to do that. Okay, but I had to calm down first. Because for me, as soon as I heard that, my heart started racing. And so we have to be aware of where we're at and that physical sensation of where we're at, okay? The next thing is, then there's the content of our tact, the content of our words, right? Colossians 4:6, it says this: let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Everyone.
And actually, the salt means peace, because Jesus says, don't lose your savor and have peace with one another.
Oh, that's good. Have peace. Very nice. I was thinking about this phrase, full of grace. Like, what does that mean? Because it sounds good, but how do we do that, you know? And obviously, grace is a characteristic of God, right? Grace is like the very nature of God. It's when God could be angry with us, but he's not, and he has compassion toward us instead. Guess what that means for us, toward the people that we're having conversations with? Full of grace means that your approach toward the other person is in the way that God would approach them. Full of grace means that your words carry a divine influence. And I love the next part, the seasoned with salt, okay? Because anyone who's a chef, Rob is a chef, all right? How many things do you put salt into when you're cooking? Just curious. Everything. Everything. Yep. It doesn't matter if it's a cake or your Alfredo, which was amazing, or whatever it is. You always put salt. Why is that? It enhances the flavor. I was eating a tomato the other day, and when I just eat a plain tomato slice, I find that to be pretty boring, or an avocado. But you put a little bit of salt on it, and all of a sudden that tomato just, for those of us that like tomatoes, like it's amazing. It's like this pop of flavor all of a sudden. And that's what happens. That's what seasoning with salt is. It's giving this like pop of goodness to life to the conversation, peace to the conversation. And when I talk to a person, even if it's a tough situation, I always want that person to walk away knowing that I still think the best of them and that I see God in them. That's my goal. That's what I always work for personally in every conversation that I have, especially the tough ones. And I remember I had to talk to this kid once. It was on a mission trip. It was a teenage boy. He was doing something that the girls in particular were very disgusted by. And he wasn't aware, of this behavior that he was doing. He just, wasn't thinking. And so I had to talk to him about it. And that was like a really, really hard conversation, But I used the sandwich approach. And I think this is an important approach for all of us to get. A sandwich, the bottom layer is the bread. And you're going to start with, the bread is the part of the conversation where you talk about how much you appreciate the person. You talk about the good things that you see in them and what's been going on in their lives that's been a positive for you. And then you get to the meat of the conversation. This is where you kind of bring up whatever it is that you need to bring up, the tough conversation, right? This is where you lay it out, the truth of what's been going on and what needs to change. And then you finish the conversation with the top layer of bread, which once again is helping them to leave on a positive note, helping them to see that despite that, the meat in the middle, you still value them as a person. And so you always want to finish your conversations with that. This works great if you're a manager and have to give like a tough review. I'm sure you've had to do some of those, right? It's also a great way to approach our kids because it's a reminder for us and them that we are speaking to someone that we first and foremost love and treasure. And probably our spouses as well, right? Sometimes we don't always remind them how much we appreciate them before we tell them what's up. Okay, so the sandwich approach. Is that some good stuff? Something you can use? All right. In fact, so God said this through Paul. Paul wrote that there will be a lot of very manipulative people. And he said that if people are not equipped and the body of Christ is not built up, then people will be swayed back and forth. You remember that verse? It's in Ephesians 4. And he said that one of the main ways that we are built up, that we get stronger, is this, Ephesians 4:15. He says, instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow. Okay, let's just stop right there. Do you hear that? Speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head. That is Christ. Speaking the truth in love is, it's quite a concept. Because there are those who speak the truth, but not in love. And what happens? It's like biting, right? It's like bitter. Swallowing bitter herbs, it's like eating coffee grounds rather than drinking coffee, right? And then there are those who love but don't speak the truth. Yeah. Why? Because they're afraid. They don't want to offend. And that does not lead to growth and maturity in people's lives. If we never have accountability, in fact, a wise person I knew once said, without accountability, there is no motivation for change. Yeah. Growth comes when we speak the truth to one another.
In love, though.
In love. Yep. Speaking the truth in the spirit of love is getting people to swallow the horse pill that isn't pleasant to take, but is going to help that person to get better and to grow. Speaking with tact does not negate speaking the truth and speaking it in love. There are times when tact is not the best approach. And the art of leadership means that we're learning when it's appropriate to use and when it's not. And it's usually the best approach. But when I look at Jesus, I don't always see Jesus using what I would call tact. Okay, now, I will say this though. I believe that Jesus was always very intentional in whatever approach he chose to use. Okay, so we can still use him as a model in these situations. And so let me explain. Tact is useful with someone who will receive the truth. It's just, we have to be aware of how to be sensitive to how they'll receive it, right? But Jesus' approach was sometimes confrontational, very confrontational instead. And the moments he didn't use tact were the moments where tact, I believe, would not bring about the desired results. All right? And which was usually with hard-headed people, which was usually the uber-religious and the religiously manipulative people. All right? And the devil. Yeah, he was pretty straightforward there, for sure. And so, we see this with the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the money changers in the temple. Yeah. Okay, he just tore it up in the temple, right? Like, he's like, this is just wrong. So there are times where we have to be aware that, a very confrontational approach might be the only approach, okay? Now, usually, I would say you start with tact. If the tact approach isn't ever going to work, then you have to go to the next level. So here are some tips for tact. Tips for tact. I like that. The first one is choose your battles. And you have to decide, first and foremost, if your concern is really that important in the bigger picture. Sometimes we don't need tact. Sometimes we just need to shut our mouths.
Or pray for the person.
Yeah, or pray about it. So you also might not be the right person to approach them. Yeah. Maybe there's someone else who really needs to be that person. All right? The second thing is appeal to higher motives. And maybe some of you guys have read Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I know a lot of people are like, that's such a manipulative book, but it's actually I think it's actually a really good book. But one of the things he talks about is appealing to people's nobler motives. And basically it's helping people to think about their choices or behaviors and how they will impact others rather than just themselves. Right? And so, if you're like a car salesman and you're trying to sell someone on this car, and it's a electric car, okay? Bad example, but you'll get the point, I think. You might say, well, the electric car, because I'm sure that you are very concerned about the environment and the impact of your vehicle and your driving on the environment, right? So you're basically appealing to someone's higher motives when you do something like that. The other thing is to find common ground. And there was a congressman actually here in southern Minnesota, and he said this, which I found to be really amazing. He said, I don't argue directly with my opponent. I find someone on the opposite side who agrees with me, and this collapses the Democrat-Republican barrier. I was like, man, that is really powerful. Because there's often a lot of things that we agree on. And if we can find those common points, it really collapses that division that's between us, right? The next thing is be aware of their level of sensitivity, right? Because you find that people, maybe they get hurt easily, or maybe they get easily angered, right? And if they're going to get angry, your response, your approach has to depend on the degree to which you believe that they'll take offense to what you're saying, right? Now, I find with my own family that sometimes I just have to be aware of how they respond even longer term. And so I always hate talking about my kids. They hate it when I do that. But
it's
Ethan,
good for them.
It is good for them. They make such great sermon illustrations. Ethan, for instance, I can say something to him, and I know he won't respond well right away.
Right, but later.
But I know that he'll think about it, and that within a few minutes, things will kind of turn around. So I know how I can approach him. And, Katie is a little bit more, less so now, but she used to be very sensitive. So you wouldn't have to say a whole lot to her. You wouldn't have to make a big deal out of it. You would just mention it, and that became a big deal for her. And so she changed whatever it was, that you wanted her to change. But you didn't have to say much. Just leave it at that. Okay, she got it, and she runs with it. So everyone, I'm sure those of you that have kids especially, every kid is different, right? So be aware of how they are going to respond. Same with our coworkers, our spouses. And then the last thing is consider your word choices. Actually, second to last. Consider your word choices. I've had to learn from others a lot how to use the right word choices. I've had some people in my life, they were so amazing with words. I was just like, how did you do that, And so I would listen and I would pick up on things along the way. I remember one of my managers in particular, here are a couple of his phrases that he would use, okay? One was, if he was negotiating with someone on price, he would always ask, is that the best price that you can offer me? Or is it possible for you to sharpen your pencil a little bit? And almost always they would come back with a lower price. Just magic, okay? Another one, have you ever had people where you're trying to reach out to them, by email, and they're not responding to you? And you're that they're getting your email, but they're just not responding, right? And so he would say this. He would email, I would appreciate the professional courtesy of a reply. And when I use that, it works every time. Because you're appealing to their higher motive, right? To be a professional, to be courteous, And so they almost always reply. It's brilliant. Try it. So, tact. Yeah. Tact. Learn from others. Hear how others approach people and steal their phrases and use them yourself, All right, so I want to finish with this. Rob, do you mind